Hey now, and how are you doing? Want to welcome you to the next episode of Peace, Love, and Bring a Bat. Today we're going to bring on Will Cook. Man, Will and I just had a conversation. We got connected with John Emery, so I want to make sure we give a shout out to John. But man, I've been following him for a while, Will, and the things that he does, the things that he says are really next level. So I'd love to talk about and bring on Will. How are you doing today, Will?
I'm good, my friend. I'm doing well. I came off the heels of a really good podcast yesterday, and I'm feeling jazzed about that. And you're my first process of the day. So I walked up with my coffee, and not having known too much about you, I wanted to be in a place of discovery and interest, and to let the connection inform how this conversation goes.
Yeah, I can't wait to just really hear. Excuse me. So why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Okay.
For those who are watching on video, right? It's the will win. So I love that. Why don't you tell us about how the will to win?
Yeah.
Um, I'd love to hear a little bit about you and some of the things that you do.
Okay. So I've been helping people for the better part of 30 years, 32 years if you include my field placements and my graduate program. I got my MSW, a master's in social work from Fordham University, and I did two clinical placements because I knew I was going to get into probably private practice at some point. So I graduated in 96, and but right away from the onset, I saw some inherent limitations I believe to be in traditional therapy, where it kind of kept people grounded in their story. And immediately I got trainings in NLP. I got my master practitioner training from the NLP Center of New York. Then I got my training in Ericksonian hypnosis, and then eventually EMDR from the EMDR Institute. Along the way, I went to some Tony Robbins events, walked on hot coals. Tony was actually trained in NLP as well. And I just became really interested in what motivated people, and why did people sometimes succeed and why didn't they, and what caused people to become unstuck. And so I found a lot of creative ways in which to do that. And right off the bat, my first job out of grad school was with gang members at it was a set of court-adjudicated adolescent males at a place called Lincoln Hall in Lincolndale, New York. And these a lot of these kids were from the inner city, the five boroughs and upstate cities as well, and a lot of them were gang members. And from the onset, they mentioned that, well, these kids are kind of rigid, and they're tough to work with, they're resistant, you're not going to be able to get very much from them. And I'm like, what? These kids have the same six human needs as anybody else. They're going to be feeding out of your hand. They want that father figure or that mother figure. And so immediately I got involved in a lot of stuff and helped create a program called Adventure-Based Counseling Program there. And we did the high ropes courses with kids, and it taught leadership, it taught teamwork, team building, and it was very therapeutic, but it was very hands-on. And there were times I'd be connected to belay to one of my clients, would be 30 feet above the ground, and he'd be giving me the commands to lower him to the ground. So they'd be attached to my belay device in my midsection, and I'd be lowering them. And so I talk about building trust, right? And it was magical. And I was really into that transformative type of work. And that's why I enjoyed the Tony Robbins events, because it's immersion, it's experience.
Yep, for
So,
sure.
went to Nature Awareness School in Lyndhurst, Virginia, and learned the five precepts of wilderness survival, integrated some of that stuff into my work, and I became very big on that. And then more recently, I'm focusing on peak performance and really helping people who are maybe even high level achievers get to another level.
Yeah,
But
sure.
then maybe helping anybody level up, but focusing on the level up as part of the process. And that leveling up is scary, so that people will sometimes experience all kinds of odd feelings because they're going against the identity that they had created, and they're regressing, and they're saying, well, I feel frightened, I feel scared. I said, perfect. You're right on target, because whenever there's a level up, there's a level of uncertainty and
Well,
a little bit of imposter. And I think what people don't realize is, if you've been operating at room temperature, which is 68 degrees, that's not hot or cold. If you develop an identity of 88, that's really cooking, but there's a big difference there. And the fear is, am I really an 88 degreer, or am I a 68 degreer? So a lot of times, my blurry here, so I'm going to turn this back on and off. There we go. Um, is people wonder, am I really an 88 degree or I'm a 68 degree? And they'll sabotage and come down.
Mm.
So what they have to realize is they need to be uncomfortable for a while to realize that 88 is their new level. Because what happens sometimes when it gets too hot in the house, the air conditioning kicks in, cools people back down, right? So they have to be willing to be uncomfortable in this new level. And it's just like doing these podcasts, is that, I'm still getting used to things and not knowing where it's going, but you don't have to know. The work will inform you. So I think people need to just be courageous in those times where they feel a little uncertain about who they are.
Yeah, for sure. You got to trust the process. I mean, some of that is trusting the process. My funny Tony Robbins story is, I went to one of the Unleash the Power Within, and I realized, I knew his background, and I knew that he does NLP. So right
Yeah.
before you walk on the fire, right, it's that hour, 2 hour, intense piece.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of induction there, and I'm
That's
like,
right.
all of a sudden, I'm like, oh, I know what he's doing. And
Yeah.
when I walked
Yeah.
across, I was like a little fearful. This did
Hmm.
I overplay, that I knew what was going on, but
Right.
but it was one of those things I focused. I mean, it was one of the best experiences that I've been at because there was something visceral as
Yeah.
part of that whole event. I mean, you've been part of it, so that is one of the great ways to learn. I mean, I really love learning experientially versus give me a book.
Right.
I mean, when I think about it now as an older person in chemistry in high school, I couldn't remember a lot of that stuff. Well, you put me in the lab to do stuff and to
Right.
learn what I needed to do properly. Man, that was my stuff. You could teach me physics by teaching me how a car moves and
Right.
what the Doppler effect really is. That was much more valuable than understanding some of the chemistry around that.
Right. Right. Immersion.
But I do have a question because what made me think, and I one of my fears is heights. I have a little height challenge. Um, but I really, in a lot of ways, I want to do the ropes course. And because you mentioned that you have done the ropes course, as part of the work that you do. What do you do when somebody is fearful of heights for that?
Okay. So that's I love that you brought up the example because, for example, like adventure-based counseling, which is not accessible to everybody, right? So, I mean, but is the experience has a high perception of being dangerous, but the actual danger is extremely low,
Mhm.
right? So when somebody's 40 feet up, their body might be reacting viscerally. They might be having sweating, that clotting thing that when you have the clamminess, that's
Mhm.
actually a clotting mechanism because the body thinks it's actually going into battle. Um, is that the person is in that experience and they realize that the fear is kind of false evidence appearing real, FEAR.
Right.
And if they endure that systematically, if they move towards that and they keep doing that, they'll be less fearful. Um, Alex Honnold in the movie Free Solo, when he's the guy who did El Capitan at 3,000 foot of
Yep.
granite without rope. And they studied his amygdala and the part of his brain in an MRI. And they recognized that he had very little arousal when they were showing him this intense material while he was in the MRI. And some said, oh, he must have been born that way. That must have been something inert that he was born with. And the challenge is that he had been climbing for 30 years. He had done thousands of climbs with rope and then over 1,000 free solos without rope. So he interfaced with that fear so often that he had very limited arousal in his amygdala.
Mm.
It takes more. So, in terms of like, say for you, if you have a fear of heights, it's, let's say it's really intense, right? So we might, in the office have you imagining being on a high uh,
On a high,
level,
right,
right?
platform.
I might even have you, we do this technique, this three-step disassociation where I'd anchor you into a certain feeling. There's that camera again. Sorry about that. I would anchor your nervous system into a certain emotion, and then maybe we would be having you imagine being high in the sky or on a ledge, And that would be from 3 steps removed. So we'd have you watching yourself in the audience as you're looking at the screen. So 3 steps removed. Then what I might do is I might take you someplace, um, maybe up one floor,
Mm,
and then have you kind of get closer, get a little bit closer, and systematically desensitize yourself until we keep going up another level, another level, another level, and you're used to it. But usually it's how you associate it in your nervous system. So if somebody has a fear of snakes and you talk about snakes and they go like that, you already know they have a very strong picture. And I
mm,
want to find out about that image. Is it big? Is there a hissing sound? Is it like this? And what we'll do is we'll play with what's called the submodalities,
mm.
and we would change that picture up a little bit. And eventually, the way they represent the snake in their mind won't be as intense. And eventually, you move towards actually having the person hold the snake. So part of it would be systematic desensitization and helping you with your height thing. But it's one of those fears where it's kind of good to be afraid of heights.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I've pushed myself. I mean, I'd gone through a divorce and I went hiking up in Bryce Canyon. And a lot of our national parks don't have railings for everything.
Right.
So I walked over sort of that the same scene that oh man, with Robin Williams. I can't think, but where you walk to the cliff and you kick the little rock over, and I felt comfortable. I knew I was in control. When I've gone to the Eiffel Tower, I walked to
Hmm.
the edge. I didn't run to the edge like other people, but
Hmm.
I get to the edge. So that desensitization that you were talking about,
Hmm.
um, and so yeah. I have the big fear of falling. So because I'm a photographer, so I'll hang off the side of a it's ironic. I'll hang off the side of a railroad, which I've done before in Alaska and things like that, where I'll go out on a limb in Yosemite, where I'm putting myself out, not worried about it because I feel confident in my ability.
Well,
But the
be,
height,
yeah.
uh,
So I love that you said that because that's state dependent. So in other words, when you're doing something you love and you're doing your fear, you're so into what you love and your passion that it almost overrides and overarches that tape that you run. So then you could do that. Now, the funny thing, you should mention Bryce because in my office right now is a photograph of Thor's hammer in Bryce Canyon.
mm.
Isn't that
I told you,
wild?
man, we're connected. I told you there
Yeah,
was
yeah, I know.
something
So
earlier.
that
Yeah.
that's so when I always I love this. This is my favorite because when you connect with somebody, there's a reason, and then you find out the real reason, or you find out the deeper reason. And Bryce Canyon and Zion, which I toured at the same time after
Yep.
going out to Vegas, because they're close to each other,
Yep. The three
fairly
hour
close.
part each. Yeah. Yep.
Exactly. Um, that I actually went away for a week by myself, and it was one of the most moving, spiritual, beautiful experiences I've ever had. It was, I photographed horse.
I could imagine it because I've been there and I used to travel with my friend Kevin and he'd go, but he couldn't physically do a lot of things. He'd be happy just seeing some of the stuff, and I'd go off hiking by myself.
Yeah.
And and it is, when you're in that, it's just it gets overwhelming in some ways just because of the immenseness of the both of those places, the mountains and the canyon, but it's also puts you in the position of the world's much bigger than I am, and I can still make an impact. But man, the beauty has to be created by something much larger than I am.
Oh, I think it takes us out of our perceptual position, and I think our own, again, our own narcissism. And I don't say that in a negative way. I say that like when we're stuck, we're in somewhat of a freeze, and depression is in some ways a freeze. And so when somebody puts themselves in a situation like that, where they're in the scale, like the rocks, and they tell you how it's a freeze and thaw mechanism, and that's what creates Bryce, and you're like, what? And that's over a million years of freeze thaw, and you're like, how does that even like possible? And then you go there, and I was there near the full moon one night, and I was in the canyon, and I was doing light painting. I was had my shutter open, and I was actually light painting Thor's hammer with a flashlight. And so I illuminated. So the rock looks lighter than the rock around it because I had done a couple swipes during my 30-second exposure. And people were coming down in and I was sharing with them what I was doing, and that was spiritual too.
Mhm.
But I'm sitting here with gratitude. It's the middle of the night. I'm in Bryce Canyon. I'm in a desert, and I felt small but big.
Yep.
And it really kind of it just shakes you out of the programming for a minute.
Yeah, no, 100%. Brings me back to some of my memories from Bryce, and again, my friend Kevin, never, he went to Disney World with me at one point and didn't get excited, didn't buy a pencil, and we watched the sunrise in Bryce Canyon, right on Sunrise Canyon. And we were there, and I said, Kevin, you have to get out because while you've always seen stars, and maybe you have a different view of the stars up in Westchester, back in the city, we'll see some stars, but when you're at a national park and there's
Yeah.
no light po poison, and you see a million stars,
Oh yeah.
and that I was like, you got to get out. And he was amazed. That was one of the things I remember. And he unfortunately passed early. But that was one of the things I told
Mm.
a story about. I go, he had it in him. He just didn't see things that registered for him. And I guess maybe that's sort of the same thing that you were just talking about the climbing of El Capitan, right? That he's always living in that hyper world, or how we think our perceptions are, that nothing registers good, bad, because in Kevin's case, he had a lot of negative things in his life. But when he saw something so incredibly extraordinary, that moved him.
Yeah, and being moved, right? And you don't know what's going to do it for somebody. And we want to share what moves us. And not
Sure.
everybody can join us in that, which is sometimes sad. It might be frustrating with a family member where we're maybe the person that is broken out of a mold or shell, and then we want people to join us on the journey. And um, actually Bryce on the Bortle scale is it's number one. So like there's levels of dark sky, and one is the darkest, and Bryce is one.
Yep.
And so I was there when the moon was big, so that didn't happen. But you can see details and things you've never seen before. And if you sit there long enough, you could see even more. And that's what sometimes when somebody's never seen something before like that, it triggers them into that awe and wonder state, which is a childlike state.
Yep. 100%. That was one of the things um, that I used to tease him about. Uh, but it was incredible. It was more than just saying, "Hey, I see the stars." It was more than any planetarium I've ever been to, and it just was so awe-inspiring. So maybe you need to go back. I know I need to go back because I think about that all the time, about going back to some of the places that I've gone, and with my eyes of today versus my eyes of those
Back
other
then.
years,
Yeah.
and have some fun. And that's why I know you just went to Watkins Glen. I was passing by. My both my daughters at one point had gone upstate to school, and I'm like passing it by, and I'm was nearby. My sister used to live in Binghamton, so it was
Hmm.
very attainable. Then there was the day that I dropped off my daughter, and she, dropped her off, and she was like, "Dad, all right, I'm good, I'm done." And I was like, "I just drove 6 hours up to get you there. What am I doing?" But what I did is I was like, "No, I'm taking care of me," and
Yeah.
I walked Watkins Glen, and I with my camera, and took my time and struggled. Didn't know why I was struggling, but now I do. Um, but it's one of those things that was one of the nicest days of my life, that by myself, and
Mhm.
you know, looking forward to those type of things. So
Yeah.
a lot of the stuff that you do is for peak performance. So how did you get into that? So I know you said clinically you went to you went here, but you seem to be a person who always is pushing themselves and wanting to learn and educate
Hmm.
on different
Hmm.
you know different ways to
Yes.
see things.
Yeah, I've always been inquisitive that way. It started a couple ways, and there's one particular thing. There was a program I was involved in my junior year in high school called the Walkabout, and it was based on 5 challenge areas. There was two wilderness backpacking trips, one in the fall, one in the spring, a week long, one in the Catskills, one in the Adirondacks, a community service project that we did for 3 weeks, an internship where we did for 9 weeks, two 10-week academic periods, and then at the end of the year, we did presentations about the growth that we had. So it was an experiential educational program, and it was actually ranked one of the top 40 experiential educational programs in the country. And it's for kids to average to above average abilities that could benefit from a different type of learning environment.
Mm.
So the challenges of having a full pack on with everything you need in it for a week and doing a presentation in front of an entire group or calling a company and saying, hey, I'm a high school student looking for an internship. Can you help me out here? We had to do cold calls. And mine was at Fleet Weather, which is a meteorological consulting company. And that was an incredible experience. But it created self-reliance, and experiential learning was what it was all about. So I got hooked on experiential learning because I felt to me that the classroom environment was so limiting. I had so much energy, and these people wanted me to sit and listen. And I'm like, I can't do this. This is not how I learn. And it was extremely frustrating. So I got hooked on experiential learning and experiential process. And it's like, if you want to learn a language, do you want to sit in a classroom or do you want to go to Italy and learn the language?
Sure.
Right. So I became big on immersion, and and the challenges with being in with a client for an hour a week or whatever is, what do they do when they're not with me?
Mm.
And what do they do when they're not with us? So is I have to rely on them, and I push them to have experiences and then to come back in
Mm.
and to talk about it. And I might recommend movies, I might recommend books, I might recommend that they go to a Tony event, and that can stir up fodder for the work. But if they don't put that effort in, just like if you're a personal trainer and somebody doesn't put the effort in when they're not there and they're not eating well, you're not going to get results. So what I wanted to do is I wanted to say, how can I speed this up? Or how can I do processes that allow somebody to really get a sense for their inner world? Because in NLP, you got this outer world, but then you have the map of the subjective experience is what is that, how does somebody represent their reality, and how can you tinker with that to get them to face reality in a new way?
Correct.
So for me, I just, and I love the mind of a peak performance expert. And I knew, talking to say Mitch yesterday, what would fire him up. And uh, and I wanted to know what his path to greatness was, and then him breaking it down and being consciously aware of his skill,
Mm.
and then seeing if he found meaning. Because it's interesting if you talk about the 6 human needs, and one of the needs is for significance, right? So if you're a world-class gymnast, you're getting a lot of your need for recognition met there.
Sure.
But in terms of real growth and real fulfillment of the 6 needs, the two spiritual needs, the need to contribute and the need to grow, actually helps you meet the other four.
Mm.
But if somebody's getting up there in their lives, you want them to focus on contribution and growth. That's what leads towards fulfillment. And you want them to do it early. But if somebody's struggling with their identity and maybe, they retire early, like in gymnastics, you have to find meaning. It's Man's Search for Meaning, which is a book by Viktor Frankl.
Right.
And it's, why am I here? What am I doing? And when certain things happen that are cataclysmic, we then have to look for the meaning. What am I going to do with this? Because you can't change it, right? My father passed in December, and it's shifted the whole constitution of my family in a way.
Sure.
And it's like, well, he's gone. So how am I going to use that? What am I going to do with that? Because I don't want to be in grief about it. I want to have the grief, but I want to be able to shape it. And I know this podcast journey is part of his strength that he's given me.
Yeah, right. It's how we receive the things that are in our lives, the obstacles, and how we overcome them.
Yes.
And and grief is very personal. I
Yes.
understand that. I mean, uh, again, when both my parents died, it was a different experience, but it also taught me a lot about it. Like I've said, I joke around. My dad got smarter once he died. A lot of the lessons he taught
Mm,
me, resonated a lot
yeah,
differently. I didn't necessarily like his methods,
right.
right? So, but the same thing with my mom. My mom, she stopped eating a few months before she transitioned, and I went down there to talk to her, and she says, "You're waiting for me to die." I go, "I'm not. You're not eating. I'm not. This is not in my control." And when it started getting worse months later, people were like, "Are you going to go back down?" I was like, "No, I said goodbye already. Like, I'll see her." I knew we were burying her here. We had plans, but it was one of those things that I was comfortable in what I did. And people are like, "Oh, I could never do that." I'm like, "Okay, that's you." I know, regularly I talk about my parents, and that's how they live on. And you have to be comfortable with whatever you're experiencing. So grief is something very personal to each one of us. Even that collective beliefs on things changes. My sister acts differently. So,
Mm.
you know, each person does what they feel that they need, until we give cues. How do you pick up the cues or the triggers? Because a lot of people go, those things don't bother me. I experienced a survivor guilt 35 years after the fact of one of my girlfriends. So how do you use that for peak performance?
Well,
Once you see.
it is a good question because it's sometimes what people talk about, but it's also what people don't talk about.
Hmm,
So, and if they talk about it and then they go past it right away, I'll say, hold on, let's bring that back over here. Now, if it's the first session, I won't do that, right?
right,
You got to build rapport and give a chance for a person to unfold within their process. But if I go at there's a hot button and I see them shift, I'll go, can we sit with that for a second? And then I said, hold yourself there. And they might smile because they're uncomfortable or might, so then I'll know.
right,
Um, but also I'm looking for a lot. And as you know, with NLP, there's a lot of interest in eye movement, right? What if somebody said, hey, I noticed you looked up and to the right when you were mentioning your dad. Did you picture something? And they go, oh yeah, I saw my childhood home. And I said, okay, great. So it's like the NLP with that curiosity is you're constantly noticing information in physiology, eye movements, predicates, language, um, and so those are all cues. And also, you know, um, if somebody says like there's belief questions you can ask too. So like for example, if someone says I really suck at this, I will say, well, how do you know? And when you ask how do you know, you get their belief,
right.
right? So there's a lot of ways to elicit things. There's visually to see things, there's questions to elicit things. Obviously, if someone looks emotional, right? That's a clear tell. But there's so many ways if you remain curious. And I think the key is not to be careful not to infuse bias in your own meaning onto the client where you say, hey, I'm curious. I noticed you did this.
Right.
What does that mean? And they might tell you something different than what you thought you
Right, because
saw.
they put themselves in that defensive position,
Right,
and there's a different ways to go about it, and that's through expertise that you obviously have.
right. Yep.
That those are the things that I enjoy talking about because you really you get a lot more information by asking the right questions. I love like when I do these podcasts and somebody goes, "Oh, that was a good question." I like to dive down a little deeper in what you do. And you mentioned about Mitch. For those who don't know who Mitch is, Mitch Gaylord was a Olympian. So Will has lots of people in his network, high performance people. Right? You don't get to be an Olympian just by doing something really good. It's is a certain level and a different mindset. What type of mindset does somebody need to be peak performance, right? Not just, hey, I did it, right? Not the I did it crowd. Those are,
Hmm.
how do you get to that peak performance
Okay.
mindset?
Great question. There's a few ways I'm going to answer that. So, it's not about the outcome, it's about the process. So they fall in love with the process and they become addicted to the process. And there's certain things they can't control, but they can control their consistency within that, which is the work. Now, so we don't want motivation because motivation is fleeting. Motivation is something that you could go to a Tony Robbins event, get pumped up, go home and do nothing.
Right. Tony talks about
Now,
that, right? Mondays is the worst day of a Tony Robbins event. Right.
exactly. So then you have discipline, right? Which is you still have to think about it, right? But when it becomes a habit, you do it without thinking about it. It becomes part of your routine, like brushing your teeth. So with a high level person, it's not whether they're going to do it, and there's no negotiation.
Sure.
They're going to do it. There's no negotiation. And even with Kobe Bryant, where he said to the guys, "Hey, I'll go out drinking with you. I'll go out drinking with you, but you have to then go with me to the gym at 5 a.m." And some of the guys wouldn't be able to make it. He said, "No, we had an agreement. I said if I was going to join you, you had to then join me." And so he was trying to show them and hopefully get him to buy into that relentless mindset.
Mhm.
And it is relentless, and it's actually kind of delusional. But actually, we're all delusional. It's
Sure.
which delusional are you going to buy into?
Right. Which story we're telling ourselves. I mean, that's,
Exactly.
you know,
So with a relentless peak performance expert, um, they're going to have this delusional belief. And they're also it's going to be a process that never kind of ends. As soon as they win the Super Bowl, they're already saying to their trainer, when are we starting again?
right.
So that's what Tim Grover talks about with the greats like a Michael Jordan or a Kobe, um, and Dwayne Wade and Charles, which he worked with all of them. So that's part of that mindset. And also being okay with not knowing, not being ashamed of not knowing. Tiger Woods' dad Earl used to say about Tiger is he was always curious and he wasn't afraid to ask that dumb question. He was always asking questions and always curious about the process. What was interesting with Tiger, and I have some theories about his struggle, but first thing I'll talk about is when he was 13 years old, he said, "Dad, I need an edge because I'm playing against 18, 19-year-olds that can hit the ball further than me. What can I do?" And his dad was a Green Beret, and he said, "Tiger, I have this process and you can go through my training, but you're not allowed to say a word." So Tiger had no idea what he was getting into. So when Tiger was about to hit a ball, he'd all of a sudden take Tiger's golf bag and drop it, or he would throw a dozen golf balls at his ball. And Tiger would get furious and look at him, but he wasn't allowed to say a word. And he would stripe the ball up the middle and look back like, "Take this." And eventually it had no impact on him. And Earl said into the camera while he was being interviewed, he says, "Tiger, your training is now complete. You'll never meet anybody as tough as you are mentally." And then his dad looks at the screen and says he never has and he never will. So he built a robot. Now, one of the reasons he's struggling though is I don't think he was equipped for the world because he was so robotic towards his experience. I think he compartmentalized a little bit too much.
Right.
And I think things caught up with him. And I think there was a lot of trauma there. And Earl wasn't the best behaved dad. He was a philanderer. He would take women into the trailer, have a few drinks, and Tiger would be out on the course, and sometimes Tiger would catch him doing that. So Tiger had some pain, and I think the compartmentalization made him a great golfer, but I think it put him in turmoil.
Sure. Yeah. Right. There's so much that went on, and again, that focus, right? A lot of the people, very few people, when they're playing at the peak performance, right? So we're talking about athletes, but a lot of people, once they get to a level in their mind, then they feel that they can ease up. And I remember talking to a gentleman about investing, and he was in his 80s when I met him,
Mhm.
and he goes, "I'm still going to be as aggressive as I can." He goes, "Why would I never want less money?" He goes, "I don't
Mhm.
know when I'm going to
Mhm.
stop." He goes, "Do I take different risks? Do I
Mhm.
maybe put more of my profit into a safer thing?" But yeah, he goes, "Not much." He goes, "Because I still want that aggressiveness." I mean, Tom Brady is another one, you know, where not necessarily in his personal life. Well, I didn't really, his focus was so much on that next championship, he put everything else aside. He doesn't, when you talk to him, now he regrets a little bit because his children are older
Mhm.
and things like that, but he had no regrets. He walked away from a model, right? One of the top models in the world, and didn't think too much about it in his pursuit of what he felt he knew he could perform.
Yeah, when you're in a marriage with somebody like that, like Tom Brady, you have to understand that you're married to a man that has a process, and the process is above everything else
Yeah.
while he's especially doing it. And sometimes people are like, "Hey, where'd you go? You dropped off the face of the earth." And like, well, that's what the sacrifices are when you're relentless like that. So when you're top level like that, that you have to know what you're getting into. And I think that with Tom, and I don't know their story, I don't know what their relationship is
Right. You
like,
don't know
right?
the whole thing.
We
Yeah.
have no idea. We just see what we see. But, I think he went on a year or two longer than he said he was going to.
Yeah.
And um and it's funny because she, like, some of it came from her, and I think as competitive as he was, he was annoyed that she had announced it and he went back and played another year, which who knows if that was part of his competitive nature or not. But the reality is you're talking another level. We're
Yeah.
talking about, like, when you're talking about that level, I mean, there are athletes, there are Olympic champions, but when you're talking about that level, like, these guys are relentless, and they're killers. They don't be fooled by Steph Curry's smile. That guy wants to step on your throat.
Right.
He has that same mentality.
Right. Travis Kelsey, right? I knew the way the season ended last year that I would have been very surprised if he did not come back this year. Just because of the fact
Mm,
that it ended so poorly.
right.
He seems to be comfortable in ending his career. Like, that's a conversation he's having, that if it ended on the right way, doesn't have to almost. I'm really not sure that it has to be a Super Bowl win, but better on his terms
Yeah.
than last year did not, right? Mahomes got hurt, all
Right.
these things. And that's the mentality
Hmm.
of that peak performance, that ultra peak performance, right?
Right.
Most of us don't have that, but there's still that level, and there's always a level. So again, when we're hiking up those mountains, you get up those levels and you don't know. I'll go back to my friend Kevin walking up Nevada Falls in Yosemite, and he again wasn't a physically fit man, and he would struggle up. And I said, "Hey, it's okay. You don't have to do it. It's okay. Just relax. I'll go up to the top, take the pictures. We'll say you went up there. Don't worry about it." He pushed himself.
Yep.
He pushed himself beyond what I expected him to do, pushed himself really more than what I think he expected himself to do. But then after that, every moment after that, all I had to do was mention Nevada Falls, and you could see the smile, the joy that he had. And that's
Hmm.
what we all need to do, is find out what our Nevada Falls is, what our pieces to push ourselves. Like for me, I don't know what my Nevada Falls is. I know I'm loving what I'm doing and pushing my envelope on the podcast, the speaking.
Right.
I know. I mean, that's how I did, comedy. People are like, you're a speaker. You already get on stages. What do you mean you're doing comedy? What else do I got to do on a Tuesday night? They had a class. Let's go do it.
Right.
And been fun. You just got to keep pushing yourself. I believe keep pushing yourself and keep growing.
I agree. And I think that hiking is an extremely good example of that because people think it's about the summit. They think it's about the view, which is actually a very small percentage of a hike. And there's a lot of journey, there's a lot of process, and there's a lot of each step is sometimes difficult. You got to also battle balance and slipping and being safe, and but you're exhausted, you're chafing, your muscles have lactic acid in them, and then you get to the top, and you have this perspective and view, uh, and then whatever you've carried with you, so to speak, and then you think on the way down, if you've gone on a very steep hike, people think, oh, the way down, it's relief. It's like, oh, your knees are going to hurt. If you have knee problems, your knees are going to hurt. And it sometimes takes longer on a hike like a Mount Washington in New Hampshire or something when you're coming, you're rising 4,000 feet in 4 miles. So on the way down, you're going like this. And so that you thought you were going to have relief. And then you realize this is actually harder in some ways than going up. So now you're battling yourself. And then the perception of mileage, like for example, if you're, let's say you're doing Algonquin, the second highest peak in New York, and there's 4 miles up, 4 miles down, and you go through 4 or 5 climate zones, the last mile rises 1,000 feet, and that 1 mile takes an hour. And people then see false summits. Is that the top? You're like, no. And they can't believe how long a mile is in the woods. And it will mess with your head. And then when you're done, part of you says, I never want to hike again. 2 days later, you're like, when are we hiking?
Yeah.
Right. So it's a great way to build mind. It's sharpening the sword is what physical stuff does is it sharpens the mind. David Goggins talks about this in the book You Can't Hurt Me. And it's really about what the exercise does for this.
Yeah, no, that's what it is. And I mean, again, with the Nevada story, the Nevada Falls story, we looked for a short hike. So now, it was a mile and a half. Didn't really realize that it was like 1,200 feet in vertical. Um, and they said it was a moderate walk. I'm like, I don't know about that, but we started seeing and to kind of push ourselves. Um, and I was glad to go, up to the top and things like that. And it's not one of those places that you everybody talks about in Yosemite, right? There's, Half Dome. There's all these other,
El Capitan, Half
yeah,
Dome, Yosemite Falls.
yeah. So all those are
Mhm.
the obvious parts of it. Um, so we'll round up the episode, and I usually have people walk into my magic garden or a magic garden where we can leave one more bit of advice or a seed to that you want to either plant that might grow like a magic seed from Jack and the Beanstalk, or that somebody needs to water and take care of themselves with themselves. What seed? What
The
seed would you like
okay,
to
so
keep?
okay, I love that. And this is just the first thing that comes to mind.
Yeah.
When you're faced with something very painful, somebody dying, maybe even seeing the process of them in decay, where they're physically dying, um, lean into how difficult that feels. So, for example, my dad, who had passed in December 17th of 25, he had been sick for a very long time with stage 5 kidney, congestive heart failure, multiple myeloma, which is a cancer of like the bone, like the bone marrow or
Mhm.
whatever and I think that's correct. And I'd been with my parents. My dad was not 91, and my mother is currently she's going to be 88 on tomorrow. Um,
Happy birthday, Mom.
Happy birthday, Mom. We celebrated a little bit last night too. But so I had been along with her in the journey through my dad's process, along bedside, and I actually took them to a David Gilmour concert at Madison Square Garden. Um, and my dad was standing during Comfortably Numb, the encore,
Nice.
and my mom was standing and I was standing, and that was one of the most beautiful moments of my life. On the floor, great seats, but we did everything as long as we could. We did things all the way till the end. So when he was starting to go the day before the death rattle, where they're starting to breathe a certain way, and my mom said, "Guys, let's go home because we don't know how protracted or how long this could go on for." So we came back Wednesday, and he was really in the rattle.
Mm.
And we said we were sitting there for hours, and my mom says, "Let's go downstairs. Maybe he wants to pass alone." So we went to the wellness room, and I'm sitting down there, and everybody's chattering, and I'm getting irritated.
Mhm.
And I'm like, "No." I went upstairs and I went into the room and I put my hand on his chest and I was breathing with him and rising and falling with his chest. And I'm saying, "Dad, it's okay. You can let go. I
Mm.
got you." And people came up and they came into the room And I intuitively, at a certain point, said, "Put your hands on dad." And everybody put their hands on dad. And all of a sudden, the nurse had put something in his port, and he starts opening his eyes. And my nieces and nephews and my brothers and my brother's wife were there, my mom, and they're like, he's opening his eyes. So I went over his face, and my face was this close to his face, and he looked me right in the eyes, and he took his last breath.
Mm.
And there was like a celebration of the fact that he let go, and we helped him, and we were there. And then, of course, the grief in that, it was quite challenging. But what I've found is there's a richness in what we fear and we want to avoid when it comes to stuff like that, that if we face it, it can be very transformative. And it gave me a strength
Mm.
that I can't describe. And believe me, I've had moments where I haven't felt very strong.
Yeah, no, I can imagine. Like I said, it's how you give yourself grace
Yes,
at some point.
yes, yes. That's giving yourself grace within that strength and facing it. The funny thing I always mention to people is one of the top grossing movies of all time for a while was the Titanic.
Mhm.
Well, we knew the ending.
Right,
We're like, people are seeing that movie in droves. They're seeing it once, twice, three times. Now, there was a love story, which was part of that, but there's something very spiritual about death. There's very spiritual about end of life.
for sure.
So, what I'm saying is, overall, not just within grieving death or anything, is my thing about this germination in this garden for people would be to say, if you bail on these things, you won't experience the levels of joy that you deserve, because when you affect one area of the continuum of emotions, if you crimp on this side, you're going to affect this side.
Right,
So by facing what sucks and is gutturally painful is very transformative and transmuting, and that will help you to really see what really matters, because at the end of it, it's like, well, shit, we're all going.
right.
So why not go to Yosemite? Why not go to the Tony Robbins event? Why not bring your friend with you on a trip? Why not do a podcast? Why not get into that relationship? Why not get out of that relationship? It's
100%.
it's actually very simple, but we make it very complex.
Yep. We are very complex beings,
Yes.
and we sometimes that's where we get in our own way, and we need to figure out by finding people like yourself who can help us get out of our own way in many different using resources as well as having that different perspective.
Yeah. I think one of the things is staying humble. I think for me, as exciting as it is to work with Olympic athletes and Major League Baseball players, all that stuff, and I get to tell people about that, but there's nothing more humbling than this work. And because of the pain and what you witness, and but also the elation and the transformation, and really hoping people make it, where some people you don't know if they're gonna.
Sure.
And then they have a breakthrough, and then you say, well, you're not going to believe what happened this week, and you leave the office that day and you're like, this is why I do this.
Mm,
And so, and then losing my dad, very humbling.
sure.
Looking at my mom at 88, high functioning, doing a lot, going to on casino trips. um how much do I have, 5, 10 years with her? I don't know, you
Right.
know so but I think that I love your question about the garden. I think that's a fantastic question to ask people, and it's probably very interesting to see how people respond to it.
Yeah, I love it because it's a very personal thing at times, and that was a wonderful story of not only personal but how we all can apply that to our own lives. So I appreciate you sharing that. Thank you very much. And
Oh, thank you.
it's one of those things that I enjoy very much to see the guests' perspectives. But thank you. And thank you so much for this, this past hour. This great conversation, great connection, and I do hope we build that, build upon that in our future.
Well, thank you, and I look forward to having you on as a guest on my show too. And I thank you for the opportunity. And you seem like a really good person,
Hmm.
and
Thank you,
it shows.
thank you. How
Thank
can
you.
people find you? So that's
Well, there's a few ways. I'm on Instagram, Will Cook Coaching, and I just really found somebody to edit that'll help with some reels. So you'll be seeing reels of the podcast on Will Cook Coaching on Instagram. Um, and then there's willcooklcsw.com, which is my main frame. And I also have, as you mentioned, the photography. That's Will Cook Photography
beautiful.
on Instagram as well. And some of the adventures we talked about are there. You can find that picture of Thor's hammer that I talked about
Mhm.
in Bryce Canyon. And photography was a big inspiration for a while, and I did it professionally for a while, and I was able to do some cool things like photograph the Stanley Cup trophy and some fun stuff like that. But now it's taking a back seat in terms of it's more for my enjoyment because I really want to focus on the work with people.
Awesome. Well, thank you, my friend, and I
Thank you,
can't
David.
wait to see where this goes and build upon you and just see the amazing things that you do. So thank you.
Thank you,
And
David.
you're welcome.
Appreciate you.
Thank you. And for everybody else, of course, I want you to start your foundation as peace and love. Get to that part, what that means for you. And, when you need to bring a bat, remember, bring awesome thoughts. Be authentic, be who you are every day and get that sweet spot. Take that swing and hit your sweet spot. Thank you so much and God bless.